Hi, I'm Jeff Stark. Thanks for being with me today. This is the second video of a series of videos that we've titled Leave, Cleave, in One Flesh. That's language that you might find familiar coming from Genesis chapter 2, where in verse 24, on the sixth day, God says, "For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and they will become one flesh." That we looked at in our first video. We looked at that rather carefully, and we discovered that on the sixth day, God laying down for all people everywhere, for all generations, a heavenly blueprint is what we've called it, a divine blueprint, a blueprint given to us by God about how mothers and fathers who have sons and daughters can help their children to move out of this family relationship, move toward, get married, and enter into a new marital relationship, and how to do that according to God's heavenly blueprint. And so he's been very gracious to teach us what that means, and there's a leaving that involves, there's a cleaving that we're going to get into, and there's a one fleshness that's going to be involved as well. We also discussed, looked at quickly, that those are not only three very important components that we need to understand and follow, but there's an order to be followed as well. And if we go our own way according to these concepts, setting the concept aside, or if we rearrange the order in such a way that suits our purposes and not God's purposes, then we're going to definitely have problems. This is a divine, pointed heavenly blueprint given to us for God's glory and certainly for our benefit. And so we want to pay very careful attention and go about understanding these things with reverence, because this is a blueprint that is given from God and not to be set aside, altered, changed, or dismissed. Okay, so that was video number one. Video number two, which is today, is going to be looking into this first concept, first principle or word that's given to us when it says, "For this reason a man will leave his father and mother." This word leave it's very important that we understand what that word means and practically what that means in terms of how to live it out. The word leave is actually two Greek words. There's a word kata, which means intensely. And the second part of the word is lipo. And when you put those two words together, it means very leaving. Very leaving. When a man leaves his mother and father, he is very leaving them. Or we might even go so far as to say he is very leaving behind his mother and his father. It's not a stretch to even say that when a man leaves, he is abandoning, he is very leaving behind, even closely abandoning, in some ways literally abandoning his mother and father as he moves toward this other woman who's now going to be his wife, and for them to set up this household together. So it is very much a physical leaving. Leaving means a lot of things, but we're going to look at in this second video today what it means to leave is to be physically to leave our mothers and our fathers. In the old days, the ancient times, the primitive times, a man might ride into a town on his donkey with some companions and friends and relatives and such, and he would be looking for a wife. He would find a wife, and what would happen? Well, she would gather up all of her belongings, and she would put them in a wagon or something, or wagons, and she would very much leave her mother and father behind. He would, as she would be now going off to a far land and setting up her own home with her own husband, and having children and that sort of a thing. So she would be very much leaving her mother and father behind, as he would do the same with his own mother and father at the time that he would be moving toward that wedding ceremony. Nowadays, what happens is, oftentimes, there are varieties of ways of doing this, but oftentimes a boyfriend and a girlfriend, or a fiance and a fiance, find they're engaged and they're going to be married early in September. So in August, they go out looking for rental properties, and they find a rental property, put a down deposit on, and they start packing things up, and they start physically moving away from their mother and father and their mother and father's home, and moving everything that belongs to them. uh, Clothing and bedding and dressers and utensils and forks and knives and jackets and everything that belongs to them. They're packing up, and they are very much leaving physically their mother and father by physically moving out and setting up a new home, of which they will move into and be husband and wife at some point in the near future. That's what we do these days. And when they physically move out of their parents, when they get to new place, they unpack and they set up a new house. They leave an old house and set up a new house. They set up a new house in a new location, different from the old location. And now they're moving in, and now they're starting a new relationship. They're no longer just a daughter and a son. Now that son is a husband, and that daughter is a wife. So there's a brand new relationship with new responsibilities and new roles that they never had before. But it's all taking place in the beginning by physically moving away from that old location to a new location where there's new responsibilities and new roles. And of course, there's going to be a new relationship that's going to begin at that particular time, a sexual relationship that's never happened before. And they've been waiting for that day, and that's going to be something new as well that they can get into, and they can enjoy one another at that particular time. But to begin with, there is a physical leaving, there's an emotional leaving, and a psychological leaving, and a spiritual leaving too. We'll get into those in future videos. But in this case, there is a physical, very leaving behind a mother and a father as well, as they go off and set up in a new location. Now, it's not uncommon for us in our day and age to hear this kind of a scenario where a man might say to the minister who's going to be presiding over this wedding ceremony, he might say, well, Pastor, my girlfriend and I want to get married. We want to be married very, very, very badly. I love her. She loves me. But we can't really afford a place of our own. We're just not able to do that right now. And so I've asked my parents if we can live in my mom and dad's basement, where there's 2 bedrooms and a rec room and a TV room and a bathroom and a little kitchen, and very suitable to what we would need. And mom and dad have agreed to let us do that. So we're not going to be physically leaving. She will be physically leaving. We're going to get married, and then she will physically leave her mother and father, but move into my mom and dad's location with me, and we're going to live there for a year or 2 or 3, until we can afford a place of our own. And a minister at that point in time ought to say that's really that. I would most strongly disagree with that as a possibility. Let me show you what that would look like, and why the minister would want to disagree with that as a good plan. I've tried to diagram this in a way that will show you the difference between the heavenly blueprint and what this young man, apparently the parents are willing to go along with as a plan B, so to speak. So in the heavenly blueprint, you have a mother and a father here with a son. This is family number 1. You have a mother and a father here, mom and dad, and family number 2, and you have a daughter. Now, what's going to happen is they are going to physically leave their homes. This is rather hard for me to do. The daughter is going to leave and form a new home, while the husband leaves his family physically, and they come together here, and they form a third family. A third family. They've left number 1 and number 2, and now they've physically left these families, and they've formed now a third family at a new location with a new household, and now as a new relationship as a husband and wife. This is a heavenly blueprint that we looked at in our first video together. Now, here's what this young man was suggesting, and perhaps the parents were willing to go along with it. It looked like this. where you have a mom and a dad, again, in separate homes, but you have the daughter over here leaving her parents, her location, and then coming over to the other mom and dad's location, where she's going to live with her husband, the son, and they're going to live in that location for a year or two or three until they can get together and then be able to afford a place of their own. Now, you can see just visually that there's a very, very big difference between God's heavenly blueprint and this particular scenario that the husband and the wife, the new husband and wife, are trying to accomplish in a different way. This is not the way that God intended a young man and a young woman to transition from singlehood into marriage. This is what God's plan looks like and ought to be implemented because it's his plan, not to be deviated by. Now, if they're not able to afford a place on their own, then there are two possibilities that they might be able to do. One would wonder, why haven't they been getting ready for this day, and why are they unprepared for this day to set up a household of their own? But that would be a discussion that the minister might want to have with them at some other time. They should have, at the age of 15 and on, been preparing for this day, particularly the husband and the wife, the daughter and the son. It takes 10 years to prepare for this, if not longer. And obviously they have not been preparing for this time, and therefore they're unprepared. And one could rightfully say, look, if you're not prepared to do this, then you're not really prepared to be married. Oh, I know you can come together as husband and wife and you can have sex because you're old enough and mature enough and adult enough, but you know what? If you're not able to provide for your husband and your wife and come together in God's blueprint, then perhaps you're really not ready to get married. But here's two alternatives that a young man and a young woman might be able to be willing to do. They might need to say to themselves, if we want to be married so badly, but in order for us to be able to afford a place of our own, a location and a house of our own, rental or ownership, well, for the first 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 years of our early years of a marriage, we might both have to work 2 jobs to acquire enough money so that we can pay rent at a location that will be of our own, that would look like this. We might have to work 2 or 3 jobs. Excuse me, here we go. There it is. We might have to work 2 or 3 jobs together in order to afford this. That's not how we would like to begin our marriage, but if we're going to do it according to God's heavenly blueprint, we might have to hold down, each of us, 2 individual jobs to be able to put together enough money to pay rent, to pay utilities, to buy groceries, to pay for car insurance and gas and those other kinds of things. So they might be starting off at a very poverty level, but if they want to be married and they want to do it according to God's blueprint, that's one possible way of trying to do that. Their rental property might not be 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, theaters, and all that. It might not be very glamorous. It might be really sticks and stones and low rent. But if they want to be married and they have to live on their own, they're going to have to pay for it on their own, and that would require a big sacrifice. I remember when I first got married, my wife and I lived in a 2-room apartment, and it was low rent. We found it in a nice location, but it was very unsophisticated. But God provided. We worked really hard, and we were able to make it go. And I remember one story real quickly. I remember the firehouse down the street once a year would sell boxes of oranges and boxes of grapefruit to the neighbors, the surrounding community, as a way of making money for their firehouse. And my wife and I, her name's Donna, my wife and I would save for a month or two. We would save our money so that when that time came, we could walk down to the firehouse and put down $40 for a carton of oranges and drag it home. And we had to save up for weeks and weeks in order to afford a carton of oranges, because we were dirt poor. We would budget our money, and back then in the 80s when my wife and I were first married, I would time for the allowance would come out. I would give my wife $5 for the allowance for that week. That's all we could afford. She'd put $5 in her pocket. I would put $5 into my pocket. And if she wanted to buy a $15 blouse, she'd have to save up for 3 weeks. If I wanted to buy a $15 football or a $15 basketball or a $15 whatever, I'd have to save up my allowance in order to make that work. But it did. God provided. And to be married according to God's blueprint, sometimes that's what has to happen, the sacrifices that we need to make. Now, so the parents of this young man who said, can we live and mom and dad, can we live in your basement? They should have said, no, absolutely not. And the son might have said, well, there's 2 bedrooms down there. There's a theater room. There's bathrooms. There's a small kitchen. Why not? It's perfect for us. Well, why? I can tell you why not. That's not God's plan. God's plan is that you leave and that you physically leave. And so you and your girlfriend who are going to be married are going to have to find a place that you can afford. Well, we can't afford. We don't have $1,000 a month to put toward rent. Well, what have you got? We've got $300 that we could put toward rent. Well, then mom and dad would have to say, well, then you're going to have to find a place for $300 rent. You're going to have to start off like a lot of people, renting a very cheap place and work hard and work your way up to better accommodations. That's something that a mother and father might have to say. And so as the son packs up his stuff and leaves, and as the daughter packs up her stuff and leaves, the mother that next day ought to go in there and clean that son's bedroom, take out the bed and take out the bureau and put in something, change the bedroom, communicate to the son, it's no longer your bedroom. Your bedroom's gone. You're gone. Your bedroom's gone. Your bureau's gone. Your clothes are gone. It's now our room, back to our room again. And there's no coming back. I've been looking forward to years to having that as a hobby room. I'm going to turn that into knitting and quilting and sewing and she starts that the next day, and she's going to paint it. And the guy comes home for the weekend to have Sunday night dinner with the family. He goes upstairs to his bedroom, and whoa, what happened to my bedroom? What do you mean your bedroom? It's not your bedroom. You moved. You physically moved. Your bedroom is with your wife, and this bedroom is really no longer your bedroom. And that's another way of the parents communicating to the children, you're leaving. You're leaving physically, you're leaving financially, you're leaving emotionally, psychologically, things that we'll look in more detail in the following videos. But that's what it means to leave. One thing it means to leave physically. And, this is a very challenging process. Let me just conclude with this. This leaving and cleaving and becoming one flesh is terribly challenging and very, very difficult to do, particularly in our next series of videos when we talk about leaving emotionally, what that means. So we have a lot to talk about. But when it says that a man will leave his mother and father, it means leave physically. He's to pack up, she's to pack up, and she's to leave, and he's to leave. Now, by the way, P.S. Okay, why does this passage say that a man is to leave, but it doesn't say the woman's to leave? Well, the reason for that is that the man is always meant to be raised in such a way as to leave his husband, the father's authority, and to go off and to become the head and authority of his own home. So he's to leave, but a daughter is described in the Bible. Daughters are given away in marriage. Sons are not given away. They leave, but we're told that daughters are given in marriage, and that is they're given by their fathers to this young man who is now going to become the husband. So the daughter lives under the father's authority and headship and protection and guidance and provision. And so when she gets married, she is transferring from under the father's authority and provision and love and care and protection now to the husband's protection, authority, and love and care and provision. Actually, the Bible says the father gives the daughter over to the son, and that's what typically takes place in our marriage ceremonies. Who gives this daughter to be married to this man? Well, To do it biblically and to do it according to the heavenly blueprint, the father is now transferring the daughter from under his authority and care and giving her over to him and to be under his authority and care and protection and love and provision as well. So that's why it says here that men leave their mothers and fathers. But what is said also about the husband leaving is also true for the wife as well, but not specifically said so in this passage. In the same way that he has to physically leave that we just talked about, she needs to pack up and physically leave as well. I hope that's helpful. In subsequent videos, it's going to get more difficult as we talk about what it means to leave emotionally our mothers and fathers, and as we move out of singlehood and transition into this one flesh marital relationship. Look forward to talking to you about that then.